Welcome to the York Daily Record Sunday News editorial board. My name is Scott Fisher. I'm the editorial page editor here, and we are here today with Pennsylvania's Auditor General Eugene DePasquale. And you are a York County resident, and so it's great to have you here. And it's been a while since we had a chance to talk to you. So
and this is clearly the easiest commute I have to get to any editorial board, which is probably why I was close to coming late today, because anytime you live close to somewhere, you always think you have more time than you do.
Well, you actually, speaking of editorial boards, I was just looking at a video you did when you visited our neighbors across the river, and you did your P90X routine.
Oh, here we go.
So
yeah.
You set the bar pretty high there. I tried to get Sarah to set up an American Ninja Warriors course.
Well, I have. The reason why I say I know is because my wife's going to start rolling her eyes if she's watching this. That is, I have my first Spartan race is this coming up Sunday, so I'm in my final stretch of training for that. So.
What is the Spartan race?
It's I'm doing a Spartan. There's a sprint, a beast, and a super, and it's 4, 8, and 13 miles. And every quarter mile, there's a new obstacle. You know, you do monkey bars, or you do a wall climb, or you do a spear throw. And it's, look, at the end of the day, like nothing. Like we're not really Spartans. Like the whole point is like it's trying to do something else to get you engaged in a different form of exercise, just so you didn't get bored with your routine. But I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Well, let's.
Next year I want to see what I have to do. Okay. I want to see time-wise. So my belief is next year I'll sign up for the elite version, which means you're in the pool to actually have a shot to win. Because you can't win if you're not in the elite pool. Okay. But I wanted to do the first one for fun, get a sense of what the obstacles were like, and I don't have any rope climbs in my backyard, so my guess is my technique's going to need some work on that.
All right, let's get down to some serious stuff. So let's talk about the big thing. Let's talk about the state budget has passed. I was just maybe interested in your analysis of the situation, either politically or what effect it might have on the state, and particularly locally. You know, whether you think it will affect York County.
I think there's several things. Number one is I think it's important, and I know there's the state deadline, which should be met, and rarely is. But then, having said that, Governor Corbett met it all 4 years and lost re-election. So, and I don't mean that to put a knock on him. I think the most important thing is to get it right. And so, for me, if the governor doesn't believe it's right, I think he's right to hold out on it. Now, having said that, I think broadly speaking, there's a couple of things that really matter. The budget needs to be truly balanced and not with a structural deficit. So that means if it isn't truly balanced, you either have to find more cuts or you have to find sustainable revenue that the public can go along with. And so I think that's critical. I think Governor Corbett signed his last budget, and there was a lot of one-time fixes in that basically exhausted all of those. So if you're not doing real cost containment on some of the, specifically the healthcare and on the pension side, you're just leaving yourself a long-term deficit moving forward. So I think it's important that they get that side of it right. It certainly is going to have an impact on education funding as well. If we don't find a way for new sustainable revenue for education, whether it be the shale or some other means, or cutting some other expenses, you're just going to see property tax increases going up. And my kids go to West York. We've seen, and West York is, you know, not nearly in bad a shape as a lot of other school districts across the state, but I've seen kids losing activities, et cetera. And you maybe, you know, when you're a kid, you don't realize this, but now, you know, as a parent, learning is not just about being good in algebra, although that is crucially important, but having kids with the opportunity for band, chess, music, you know, academics, you know, and athletics, I think that's all part of the learning environment. And it clearly shows that kids that, you know, eat well with a healthy breakfast and lunch, kids that have access to some type of extracurricular activities and good academics are going to be much better prepared for the real world. And so funding goes into playing for that, because maybe it's possible that if you took away, for example, the high school band, we could put our kids into something privately. But not every family has that opportunity, and if we're going to have a well-functioning public education system for all the kids, and giving every kid an opportunity, then and we've got to fight for that and make sure it's appropriately funded.
Just some political analysis of what's happening there. I mean, obviously, put up a budget that was vetoed and
Right.
so forth, and I guess everybody kind of expected that.
Yeah.
And there's just kind of some gamesmanship
Yeah,
going on there.
on one hand, it's easy for me to say as the Auditor General, nobody should play games, but every governor's first budget, regardless of who controls the legislature and which party has the governorship, this happens in the first budget. So whether it is right or wrong, and I mean, look, obviously we could all sit here and say that it's not the right thing to do, but it is par for the course in a governor's first budget that the legislature and the governor go through this dance. The thing that I think, and it's even interesting over the weekend, you had some Republicans saying, yeah, it was easy for me to vote for this knowing he was going to veto it. I'm like going, guys, why didn't you figure that out a month ago? Maybe we wouldn't have to go through this dance now. But having said that, look, the Republicans control the legislature. You obviously have a Democratic governor, and there's going to have to be some form of compromise. And my hope is that it be done sooner rather than later.
So let's move. We talked a little bit about school. I guess the biggest headline out of your office for York County in recent months has been the Thaxton audit.
Right.
Can you get into a little bit about what you found there and what was disconcerting about? Seemed to be a lot of problems.
Yeah, I'm going to start off from 40,000 feet first. My biggest issue with Helen Thaxton is, broadly speaking, what was seen in about half of our charter school audits across the state. And so it's about half. And so half are doing a good job, and about the other half are not. Again, we haven't audited everyone yet, but I'm talking about just from the number we've audited. It is an absolute indictment on our state charter school law that these problems continue to persist and nothing gets done about it. The absolute lack of transparency in our charter school law is, I mean, it's a disgrace. I mean, it's a disgrace to taxpayers, and we're failing the kids that are in the charter schools that are failing. And the number one mission when the charter school law was signed into law by then Governor Ridge, we were told, there was a promise made, that anything that was positive done in a charter school, we were to give, when I say we, I'm talking about the collective we as a people, it was relaxed regulation, relaxed teacher certification rules. But the point was we were going to find out what worked and what didn't, and take what worked and incorporate that, broadly speaking, into every public school across the state. This is not a problem with the charter schools and not a problem with traditional public schools when I say this. That has happened a whopping 0 times. And it is a complete failure of the Pennsylvania Department of Education to work with our charter schools to find out what has worked and what hasn't, and use those reforms to incorporate them across the state. So that's 40,000 feet. So the law needs to be updated to increase the cooperation among traditional charters, traditional public schools, and charter schools. Clearly, the transparency has to get better. I mean, when you are an elected school board member, you have to file statements of financial interest. You also have to comply with the state ethics law. Those are not happening with the boards of charter schools across the state. And for example, if a school board member also owned the building where a public school was running their gymnasium, you would rightfully go crazy. Meaning, and I don't mean that in a negative way, you'd be at that school board meeting, you'd be asking piercing questions, somebody would probably run against that candidate based on that information. If somebody that is involved in that same situation with a charter school, 0 transparency, and in the management companies that sometimes run this, again, no idea what's happening with that money. So in the classroom, sometimes you see some very good things, and we've pointed that out. But again, across the board, that has to change because these are public dollars that are at stake as well. Now, specifically in the Helen Thaxton, it was probably from a record keeping the worst audit that we've done since I've been Auditor General, and we're now coming close to 14,000 since I've been Auditor General. So that's not something to brag about. The record keeping was so poor that it was very difficult for us just to do the audit. I mean, that gives you an idea. I mean, literally where statements of financial interest weren't even filed. And this is what sort of triggered the teacher certification worry. When a charter school says they have 78%, 79%, 83% of teacher certification, we obviously go in and verify that, but that's a sign that they have some knowledge of where they really are. Mm-hmm. Helen Thaxton said during the question about that, oh, it's probably 100. Well, as we found out, they had no idea. And when we dug deep, we found it was below 75%, which is a violation of the state law, and it meant the Pennsylvania Department of Education, from the very beginning, never enforced the law with Helen Thaxton Charter School. So, I mean, it's just some of those issues. But I do think it's important to note this, though, in York City just being one example, and it tends to be more so in urban areas, but it's not entirely urban areas. Parents do want this choice. I mean, it's important to know that the families and the parents that send their kids to these charter schools, they want that option. Now, if we don't get it right, that doesn't mean that they made a bad choice. That means the collective we have let them down by not having the viable choice there for them.
You might have covered this, but why wasn't this caught in a previous audit?
We are auditing the Pennsylvania Department of Education right now, so this fall I may have more concrete answers for you. The number one point of the audit was to find out, when you have a struggling district academically, what is the Pennsylvania Department of Education specifically doing to try to lift that school district up? So I will have more thoughts on that later on this year, but it's issues like this, not specifically Helen Thaxton, but issues like this that caused me to want to start that special performance audit, because you come back and you keep running into this issue over and over again and say, okay, well, okay, I could keep having press conferences about these charter schools or this public school, but let's try to look at how do we broadly fix the problem, and that's why we decided to look at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Interestingly enough, when it comes to cooperation, not whether they had all the right information, but the Pennsylvania Department of Education was the least cooperative state agency or school district of anything we've audited since I've been Auditor General. That's actually changed a little bit in the last couple of months for the better, but their spokesperson actually said in October of last year that they weren't going to comply with the audit anymore because, quote, I was doing too many audits.
I was still trying to get at, why didn't your predecessor wade into this?
I don't know the answer to
The
that.
school isn't that old, is it? It's only back to the 90s.
Well, into
But you don't. I know you're talking about Jack Wagner. He did get into the lease reimbursement issue of the schools, but why they didn't take the broader approach, I don't know.
Could the Thaxton audit lead to revocation of its charter? Is that part of the equation there? Like when you find these kinds of financial problems?
Two things. The answer is possible, but we don't know. That'll be when the charter is up for renewal.
Yeah.
But this goes to that question is a real question that needs to be delved into by the legislature and the charter school community and the traditional public school community. What we have is actually two extremes in our charter school law. Once every 5 years, there's intense accountability when it comes up for renewal. Then for 4 years, there's practically nothing. And to me, some middle ground needs to be found, and that is, and one of the things that we've recommended is when a charter school sort of hits all its key points, academic, security, financial, maybe you do give them 4 or 5 years. But for the ones like a Thaxton or some others that have poor audit results or poor results with Department of Education, you go on by a year-by-year basis until they get their act right. So the idea that if they were to get renewed the next time they're up simply because, for whatever reason, that they would then have that unquestioned charter for the next 5 years, to me that defies all logic. But it also goes back to when the law was passed in the late 90s, I don't think anybody envisioned this type of situation occurring either.
I'm just curious, half the charter schools do a good job, half do not.
Roughly, yeah.
What would be the breakdown on public schools?
Public schools, well, again, we're talking about sort of from the audit standpoint, we've found that it's about 75-25. Again, I'm really just spitballing it.
Right.
But 75 meaning good, 25 being challenged. Unfortunately, it's many of our poorer urban districts that struggle. You do see some instances where a middle class or an upper middle income suburban district is struggling with the audit. They may still have okay academics, but where they're struggling on the audit. We have seen that. For instance, we had a school district in Erie County, the Mill Creek Township School District, clearly an upper middle income district. Academics were fine, but their financials were in terrible shape, and they thought it was appropriate to have an agreement with the Erie Otters, which is a minor league hockey team, to allow Canadian minor league hockey players to go to their school district for free in exchange for hockey tickets for their administrators. We obviously had something to say about the appropriateness of that. But having said that, the school district itself, the kids were getting a good education. And so, but the ballpark is about 75-25. But we, the number one consistent issue across the state has been busing. We have found that transportation costs are all over the map, documentation being very poor, sometimes the background checks on the bus drivers not being where they should be, and the reimbursement process with the Department of Education severely lacking, many times where the state is getting overbilled because the school districts aren't tracking their mileage appropriately.
From an audit standpoint, then, would you say that by consolidating school districts, you'd have a much cleaner financial situation for schools, or do you see that that would not be an impact?
As an auditor, it would be easier because there'd be, less to audit. As a policy perspective, and, I've often felt, do we have too many school districts? Yes. What's the right way to get administrative consolidation? I think that's a fair discussion. I've always felt that the county-based discussion, and I, maybe not necessarily even have 100% agreement in my own house on this, but I've often felt the county-based, the county-based model is not my preferred method, because then you're basing it on some geographic line that was designed 300, 400, 500 years ago. To me, if it's going to be done, it should be based on population, finding what is the right number, and also I think that you would have some administrative consolidation, probably more than not, but you could also make the argument that the Philadelphia School District is probably too big. I mean, we're auditing that district right now. I'm going to tell you, that is, the Philadelphia School District right now, if it was its own city, would be the third largest city in Pennsylvania, behind only Philadelphia and the city of Pittsburgh. It's that big. There are more charter school students in the city of Philadelphia than there are students in the public school system in the city of Pittsburgh. That's how much bigger Philadelphia is. So I say that is my point. If I were sort of, designing the system, we would find a population-based, whether it be, again, you should do it on real data, but 250, 300,000 would seem like the right manageable number, and you'd base it around something like that. But you would still keep the schools. It would be consolidating the administrative costs, because I think we could certainly do better on, whether it be healthcare contracts for teachers and administrative personnel. Certainly, you'd have to factor in transportation costs, but you'd have to have, a good system for that. But I think you could, have streamlined paper contracts, computer contracts, all that stuff, email systems, from the vendor side of it. I think you could see a lot of streamlining while still maintaining your own high school. I mean, for example, I believe it's Camp Hill, which has the school just has two high schools, Redland and Cedar Cliff. And when Cedar Cliff plays football, they're Cedar Cliff. They're not part of, and so there's a way to maintain that system, because I know sometimes the extracurricular is a barrier to this. You can maintain all the schools while tackling it on the administrative side of it. But from an auditor, there's no question, the less entities you have, the easier it is to audit.
And so when you looked at the audits of all these schools, and you see that actually the charter schools are performing, from an audit perspective again, worse than the public schools are. They're 50-50
Right.
about, what's going on with charter schools that makes that the case?
I think it comes back to the failure of the law, failure of accountability. I think when you go at who's running the school has a really big say in this. What are their intentions? Is it about creating a money-making scheme, or is it truly about educating the kids? And we can't get in everyone's heart or mind. But as just me as a human being, it's hard for me to think that when we see, for instance, some charter schools, I want to keep stressing this, and I know you know that, but I'm going to keep stressing it, some where you go, every kid that leaves the traditional public school that goes into the charter school, every one of them is identified as special education, every single one, and they're all identified as having a speech issue. We either have, and to be fair, I have to keep both our possibilities. Either the public school missed every one, which is possible, or there's an over-identification because the reimbursement for special education is so much higher, and because the funding formula for special education is the same regardless of the special needs, and the speech one tends to be the the lowest cost special needs. So you're identifying in some of these schools, every kid has special needs, and then every one of them is speech, which means you get the same reimbursement as significant emotional distress children, and it's a one-day after-school program a week. So I again, both are possibilities. I know that, if you probably, injected me with truth serum, what my opinion is on that, but I will tell you from a fact standpoint, both are legitimate possibilities. But I think the way to fix that and take the potential corruption out of the system is to do what the House did last year in bipartisan fashion and reform the funding formula for special education so that you take away the incentive for that. And then for whatever reason, it was derailed in the Senate. To me, because if a kid has a speech issue, that kid should get special attention for that. But by reforming it so that you're getting reimbursed for what you're actually instructing, you take away the incentive for what is at least the potential for over-identification.
You had proposed an independent oversight board for the state charter schools. Where is that? Is anybody?
It's the same place where any legislation on charter schools is right now. It's nowhere. So I do believe that the Wolf administration next year is they want this on their agenda. Not just that issue itself, but bringing more accountability to charter schools. I think they want to get some of their school funding heavy lift done this year and then focus on that next year.
Okay. So I'm sure you sat along the sidelines over the last couple of years watching the York City school recovery process and so forth. Part of that became a charter school thing under Mr. Meckley. What were your thoughts on what was going on with it? I can't remember. Did you vote for the recovery?
I voted no for a lot of the reasons it played out, and that was I wanted to see a plan first, and then vote either yes or no. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I think Dave Meckley's a good man, so this is not about. But we didn't even know who the recovery officer was when the legislature was asked to vote on creating a recovery officer. Mm-hmm. I was entirely uncomfortable with that. That was not saying that anyone that thinks the status quo in the York City School District is okay literally needs their head examined. But beyond that, I was uncomfortable reforming a plan without being told what the plan was. Now, as the process moved forward, obviously, look, I had opinions on it, and because it's not happening, I can now weigh in on those. I mean, I had to keep my mouth shut because I would eventually have to go in and potentially independently audit what those were. I was entirely uncomfortable with the idea of turning over the whole district into a charterized process without knowing who the management company was going to be, what the track record of that management company was going to be, and what would be the success rate of that management company. Do I think that there's a room for having a couple buildings or a school or two in the hands of a good, well-run charter school as to see what can and can't work? I think the answer to that would be yes. But having the whole district be a charter was something I was entirely, just as a taxpayer, entirely uncomfortable with.
Another big issue right now is the municipal pension reforms, and you basically proposed that we obviously need to get a handle on that issue. I know Kim Bracey thinks that there's a major problem there. Right. Although curiously, this has been sort of controversial among Democrats. I
haven't quite figured. First of all, and I've been rather blunt with some of my Democratic friends. I have a lot of Republican friends too. To me, if you've got an issue with what the Republicans are proposing, there is a simple solution to that. If you think it's a problem, that is, propose something. And then let's have a debate about that and figure out maybe where the middle ground is, or which, okay, I agree with point A from there, point B on there. And to this point, that hasn't happened. Now, I'm talking about from the legislative side. Now, there was in 2009 a bipartisan bill that came out of the Senate and unfortunately was killed in the House. Moving forward, the governor asked me, along with a group of others, to serve on a task force. We presented that plan to him last Tuesday, and I know that his team is in the process of reviewing that. There's a couple things that I think are clear. Number one is it a problem? The answer is absolutely yes. It is the biggest sort of drag on Pennsylvania cities, the bigger and medium-sized cities that exist right now. That's A. B, if we don't tackle it in a thoughtful way, we're going to have a real problem down the line. And I'm talking about like 2 to 3 years down the line. Specifically, City of Scranton, City of Chester, they're staring at not being able to make their municipal pension payments. Scranton for fire, Chester for their non-uniform within the next 2 to 3 years. So, and that's with a growing stock market that's taking place. So the plan that we put forward that I think is we think is sound, well balanced, and takes some of the best ideas from what we've seen from both parties, meeting with some of the unions, meeting with certainly the mayors, the chambers, we think is at least a very solid starting point to spearhead a discussion between the governor and the legislature.
One of our reporters who works on this issue had a question, and I wanted to just pass along. Does your office have oversight regarding municipal audits?
No, well, we audit at the municipal level only two things. Mm-hmm. One would be municipal pensions. So we have full authority there, and that's in state law. The other side is state grants that go to a city. We have authority there, but if it is a city collection of property taxes or a fine or a fee, we have, unless there's some avenue under a state law that someone would want to make some nuanced argument over, but basically the authority there is minimal to none, unless it is state money involved.
Does the Department of Community and Economic Development in charge of that kind of thing, or do they oversee audits of municipal?
This is where the city controller would come into play.
Okay.
The city controller would have full jurisdiction there, again, unless we're talking about a state grant.
Okay.
What was the second thing you said your office had oversight on that?
State grants and the municipal pensions.
Okay, so we recently had a horrible fire that dumped a ton of nitrates into the Colorado and created a big environmental issue. And you recently had a report on Pennsylvania's failure to protect the bay, which seems really tightly connected to that.
Right.
What we're doing, what we're not doing.
Right.
Can you talk about that issue a little bit? And what does the state need to do, and what do you see as what's wrong, and what should we be doing?
Broadly speaking, we've gone after the one thing that is easy to go after, and that is, I'm talking about the state level, and that is your wastewater treatment plants and your water facilities, because that's easy infrastructure. So there's a lot of fees, taxes, et cetera on that. And our systems are significantly cleaner now than they ever have been. That doesn't mean you can't make them better. Moving forward, we're going to have to develop better partnerships with our agricultural community when it comes to stream runoff, et cetera, and working with our farming community, because the next big step to take on trying to reduce pollution going into the bay is our rural community. Having said that, it's not easy. You have all the farms lined up all in the Bay Area, and I think it is incumbent upon the Department of Environmental Protection and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to partner with our agriculture community on coming up with ways, whether it be buffers on streams, runoff, et cetera. But that is the next big area that really needs to take place. And with that, there are technologies that are out there. We need to make it more affordable for our agriculture community to afford them, so that they can continue to stay economically competitive while at the same time protecting our bay.
So your office really doesn't have any power to change this, other than to say, this is a big problem. We're not meeting the federal guidelines for nutrients and sediment and so forth, and here's what we ought to be doing.
Every year, and if you're ever really bored and you want to go back into PCN and watch this, which is my budget hearing, which obviously is, the ratings are through the roof on that. And
as they will be.
No, absolutely. It will probably be just slightly lower than the Women's World Cup final, which was a great win for the U.S. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, but I can understand why more people would watch that than my budget hearing. And so.
It's a good thing PCN didn't air them at the same time.
Oh, it would have been a titanic struggle. So the point I'm getting to this, other than making fun of myself, is that every year legislators say, we love your audits, but how come nothing happens from that? We explain we have no authority. And he says, so maybe we should propose mandating the entity have to do what you tell them to do. And I say, there's a pro and con to that, but nothing's ever happened with it. But there is actually a bill, Representative Scott Petrie is introducing a bill, at least on municipal pensions, that if the municipality doesn't make their mandatory municipal obligation payment, that I'd be able to come in and say, you don't get your state aid then.
Interesting. Okay.
But right now, our authority is doing the audit, not requiring you to go along with any of the recommendations. That really is among the, whether it be the legislature or the governor or the appropriate state agency to then enforce what we find in the audit.
Let me ask a slightly touchy question. So we had a story in Sunday's paper that talked about Governor Wolf's blind trust. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. Or...
I was actually away this weekend. I literally was driving in from the family, my in-laws' farm in Franklin County as I got here. But
the upshot of it was that it's maybe not quite as blind as maybe a federal blind trust would be, because it's involves a cousin and former. Does your agency have the authority to audit blind trusts of governors? Is that something that you could get into?
No, we certainly, the only thing that we would, and this really is more of an ethics commission question, but is that, are they filing everything that they're legally allowed to require? I have long felt, regardless of Tom, that our state disclosure laws pale in comparison to the federal level, and that we should make ourselves, at a minimum, the equivalent of the federal level when it comes to disclosure. I mean, basically, if you've ever seen the state statement of financial interest, that is the definition of the bare minimum. I think the way to fix this is look, there shouldn't be, whether you're wealthy, middle class, or lower income. I mean, I think a healthy democracy has all forms of income represented, whether it be as governor and the legislature, what have you. But there should be more disclosure. But complying with the law is different than the law should be better. And I think our Pennsylvania law should be better.
Now, you actually disclose your expenses on your website.
Right.
The governor sort of does, but sort of doesn't.
I think it's the cabinet members do. I haven't actually looked at his. We were the first ones to. I was the first statewide elected official to do it, similar to being the first legislator to do it.
Yeah.
And we're always thinking of new ideas to make it even more transparent. So as time goes on, we're going to be adding more stuff to it.
So, I guess you would try to use your bully pulpit to get other cabinet members to put all your expenses online.
Yeah, to me, it's sort of common sense. I mean, it's the public time and public money. Nobody, unless I can't say no one. Very few people care what a cabinet member or a governor or myself does on their own private vacation, on their own private time. And if they do, I'm going to tell them that's none of your business. I mean, that literally is, people are allowed to take vacations, but if you're traveling on taxpayer dime, disclosing where that trip went and what it costs, and letting the public know about it, I think is the least you can do. And I think actually most people understand governors take trips, cabinet members take trips. They're selling the state's agenda. I think most people know if I'm going to Erie, it's tough to do that in a day. And so you get a hotel room. And I think people have more confidence in you when you do that. And I also think there's a broader point I try to make with it. I believe government, in certain circumstances, can do good things for the people of the whole state. But the people have to have faith that the government is doing the very best it can. And the more transparent you are in doing it, I think the more faith you give the electorate and the taxpayers that you have as close to the best of intentions as anyone could have. And again, we're all going to disagree on, actual issues. So that they'll say, you know what? He's doing everything he can. I'm going to trust him or her on this one because I think they're trying to do the right thing on that. And to me, it's not just about transparency for transparency's sake, but also trying to instill faith that people should have in their government, which for a whole host of reasons, I think a lot of government leaders have let them down over the years.
Your hotel bills were remarkably, when I looked at your website, they were remarkably low. Do you stay like Motel 6? Or,
well, okay.
No offense to Motel 6.
No, yeah, that's right. Well, because it's a Pennsylvania business, we're pro all Pennsylvania businesses. Philly, I train it to and from every day. Scranton, we drive it. Williamsport, we drive around, thinking general areas. Pittsburgh, I sleep on my mom's couch, so that is how I'm able to keep the Pittsburgh hotels. So the only time I've actually gotten a hotel was when I've been up in the northwestern part of the state, and once was at a firefighter convention that was in Meadville. That was, I think, at a Super 8 or something like that. Then we had the Erie Bayfront twice or 3 times in Erie. But I try to keep those down as much as possible.
So you think it's appropriate for the state's head bean counter, or not bean counter, but being an accountability guy to lead by example?
Yeah, again, if some other Auditor General down the line has 7 hotel bills and I only had 3, that doesn't mean he or she is, reckless and irresponsible. But I am trying to lead by example on that.
Okay.
His
All
or
right.
her mom just doesn't have a couch in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's right. I have admittedly in this a really unfair advantage over all of my predecessors. I live 25 miles from the office.
Right.
A lot of them had to get either an apartment or a hotel room in the capital area, and I don't have to do that, because usually they're elected, actually to this point, one was Erie, the other ones were all Pittsburgh, Philly, or Scranton, which meant the commute was a lot different. I don't have that problem.
A lot of our readers like to complain about welfare spending in Pennsylvania. I know that your office has looked
Yeah.
at various aspects of welfare in Pennsylvania. Can you kind of sort of summarize your findings of the
Yeah.
Department of Public Welfare? Are we being responsible with that funding?
We're going to have a full report this fall, but we did do an interim report where we were concerned that we found people that were with deceased Social Security numbers getting cash assistance. So we believe strongly that that system had to be cleaned up, and we offered recommendations for doing that, including just a cross-check with the Social Security Administration. Again, I know that they're not perfect either, but it was a simple cross-check that could have been done. Their answer was 138 isn't that bad in a state as big as ours. I understand that point, but the goal should be to get it to 0. And there's some other issues that we've seen there. Having said that, it is not wild and rampant, but so the state is better than we were, at least from going by our reports from where it was 20 years ago. But that doesn't mean we can't get better, and this fall we'll outline how specifically we can get better.
What were those cards? Can you explain? These were like debit cards that...
Yeah, well, they're called EBT cards. It's electronic benefit transfer, which is, the state, every periodically at the appropriate time puts cash on the card for people. What used to be food stamps, et cetera, now gets electronically transferred onto the card, and people that had deceased Social Security numbers were still having the cash wired onto their car, and the money was still getting spent, which meant somebody in that, whether it was a family member or friend, was committing fraud by using those cards.
Did that audit break it down to like locality? So could you tell whether...
It was statewide.
A lot of them were in your county or locally, or...
No area of the state was immune to this.
I would just want, it's kind of a broad question. What would you say has been the most important and successful initiative of your tenure so far? What is the biggest thing that you think you've
I think the
done?
DEP audit.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, when I ran, I said we were going to conduct the first ever performance audit of the Department of Environmental Protection, specifically when it came to water quality and all of the Marcellus shale drilling. And I know there's people, whether it's your pro-tax or anti-tax or all that other stuff, but I felt, regardless of where you stood on that, protecting our water was beyond question a high priority. The Pennsylvania Constitution says we all have the constitutional right to clean air and pure water. And to me, it says it in there, so I take that very seriously. And I was concerned with all the Marcellus shale drilling. Getting lost in the tax debate was whether the department was doing everything it could to protect our public water resources, and private in various cases where people rely on well water for their drinking water. We had 8 major findings of that audit. We had 29 recommendations. The department disagreed with all 8 findings. Okay, I'm a big boy, I can handle that. They agreed with...
That was under the Corbett administration?
Yes.
I think?
But they agreed with practically every recommendation. And so I know you say, well, how can you disagree with every finding and agree with every recommendation when the recommendations are based about fixing the findings? That's what I say is I'm a big boy, I can handle that. Almost all of those recommendations have been put into place with very little fanfare, and we didn't go, every time they promulgated the new regulation to fix I wasn't sitting there sticking my thumb in their eye, because that's not what I do. I don't believe in, sort of from the sports side of it, is dunking on someone and pointing in their face. I don't believe in that. The point is, real problems are getting fixed now, and I'm very proud of our team and the work we did on that audit, and I believe we're going to have a cleaner environment and a more viable drilling industry because of that audit.
I've read some reports recently about the staffing level for inspections as well of the drillers.
Oh, yeah.
So it seems like they're really threadbare at this point.
One of the more amusing, in a sense, sides of the audit was we were told on one of the disagreements in the audit recommendations was that they needed 100 new inspectors. And the department vigorously said that's absolutely not necessary. We have as many inspectors as we need. And then a month later, the industry and the department agreed to an increase in a permit process to hire more inspectors to do exactly what we said they should be doing, and they hired, it was about 30 about a month later. So you can, we think they're still light, but they're in a better place than they were 2 years ago.
Okay. Can you give us a preview of anything you have coming up that you'll be releasing soon? Any major audits
There's
with
gonna be
interesting findings for us?
Department of now Human Services, which was formerly Department of Public Welfare, will be coming out this fall. Pennsylvania Department of Education will be coming out this fall. Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Erie and Harrisburg school districts will be coming out this fall. The Harrisburg School District audit team, once they're done their field work, is immediately going to start York City School District. So those are going to come out this fall. Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board, audits of PACE and PACE-NET, which is the prescription drug assistance programs. Those are all going to be coming out, as well as a rural housing audit through the Department of Community and Economic Development. We found that the state was basically sitting on tons of federal money that was supposed to try to alleviate rural homelessness. And I know because it's more spread out, when I say we, I'm not talking about the we in this room, but the collective we sometimes doesn't always focus on rural poverty, which is very real, rural homelessness, which is really very real, rural hunger, which is very real. And this audit is going to try to see, are we using our federal resources to the best of our ability to try to attack rural poverty as well. So that's going to be all coming out this fall.
Are all those audits mandated, so you just have a list and you keep working through them, or do you have some discretion as to what things you're going to look into and what things?
Some of those are mandated, some are discretionary. The school district audits are all mandated. How we do them in the timeline is, there's some flexibility there, but they are all mandated. Volunteer Fire Relief Association audits are mandated, municipal pensions, and county row offices are all mandated. We'll be auditing the county treasurer's office this fall as well. We're starting that soon as well. Because, Barbara, actually, to her credit, called me up and she goes, you guys had something against me? I said, Barbara, we always enjoy somebody together. What do you mean? She goes, you guys haven't audited us since '06. I said, oh, well, the way to solve that problem. I mean, there's nothing other than she wanted audited because it had been a while and she wants to see if they're doing everything right. So that one will be coming out, starting a little bit later this summer. Those ones are all the mandated ones. The DEP one, Gaming Control Board, some of those ones, they're the discretionary ones. It works out to be about 75-25 mandated versus discretion, about 25 being the discretionary.
Let's just sort of talk about York County politics for a minute. It's been fascinating over the last 4 or 5 years to see that you rise to the position that you're in. Tom Wolf become the governor, and yet the Democratic Party, which you once led in York County, seems to struggle consistently to put up legislative candidates and so forth. How do we get to that point where we have high achievers at state level, but we can't seem to do it on a regular legislative? Not we, but you can't seem to do it on.
It's certainly a fair question. I don't have the answer other than sort of the Roger Bannister theory of politics, which is Roger Bannister was the first person to break the 4-minute mile. When I say this, it's not just my theory on this with politics, but it's in life. The quote I have on my desk, wherever I am, and it started when I was playing sports in high school and college, was, which now seems further and further away, which is whether you think you can or can't, you're probably right. The Roger Bannister part of this is, until Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, people didn't believe you could break the 4-minute mile. They thought it was actually physical. There were scientists that would come on TV and say the human body can't run a 4-minute mile. After Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, I think within the next 2 to 3 months, 5 other people did it. I forget whether it was 3 or 5. Because it broke the mental barrier that people had on it, and all of a sudden, oh wait, I can accomplish this, and it opened up the door for people accomplishing this. I think the same thing applies in politics. You just had the Republicans win a state legislative seat in the city of Philadelphia, in an area that is 2-to-1 registered Republican. Now, we know that's going to be the minority of times, but it can happen. The same thing could happen whether it be in York or central Pennsylvania. We all know that some of these districts are more Republican than Democrat, but if you run a good candidate who's out there knocking on doors, trying to raise a little bit of money and raising good issues, you have a chance. If you don't run someone, you have no chance. And so I would say, when I coach youth baseball, I say, you may swing and miss, but your ability to hit the ball without swinging the bat is 0. I mean, maybe the ball may hit the bat and it may be a foul ball, but if you don't swing the bat, the ability to hit the ball is exactly 0. If you swing, you've dramatically improved your odds 1,000-fold. It doesn't mean you're going to hit it. So my biggest frustration, and this is my small d Democrat, is when parties don't run candidates. Look, somebody running a good race and losing is not a failure. Sometimes the other candidate may be better. Sometimes or just people vote their party, or you just didn't raise enough money to get your issue out, or maybe you were too liberal or too conservative for that district. But it's not a failure. It's actually how our democracy is supposed to work. Now, I want to take one minor step back here, and this isn't so much for your county, but broadly speaking. I had the bill that was to create an independent commission to draw legislative districts when I was in the legislature. You want to talk about the smallest or the biggest threat to the small d democracy? It's reapportionment and how these districts are drawn. The idea of protecting incumbents as opposed to protecting voters is a disgrace. And the districts should be drawn with the idea of making the districts competitive. And when I introduced that bill, the Democrats were in the majority. And a lot of my friends in the legislature said, why are you doing that? We're going to get to draw the lines. And I said, I just don't believe that's the right thing to do. And of course, the Republicans won, and then they went out and did everything the Democrats were going to do, and then the Democrats cried bloody murder. I'm like, guys, you were going to do the exact same thing to them. Maybe they were better at it, but no side is purely angelic on that issue. I think, and I guarantee you this, if you put an independent commission on the ballot, states that are deep red like Arizona, the voters vote for it. States that are blue, Iowa, which tends to be, especially in presidential years, more blue than red, they vote for it. The voters, when presented the choice of politicians picking the boundaries or an independent commission, always side with the independent commission, always.
Right, well, the Arizona was just
upheld by the Supreme Court, that's right.
Yeah. We can't really do what they did in Pennsylvania here,
Correct.
can we? Because that was a citizen ballot initiative.
You would have to have the legislature either do one of two things: pass an independent commission law or put it on the ballot themselves. And it was a citizen. That's the point. Is in Arizona, citizens on their own went out and gathered the signatures and put it on the ballot,
right.
And it passed overwhelmingly. I mean, overwhelmingly. And there, you could argue that state has more Republicans than Democrats, and the Republicans dominated the legislature, and yet a majority of Republican actual voters thought the district should be drawn not to benefit their own party, but the whole state. And I don't know how you actually argue against that unless it's just for blindly partisan reasons.
So, go ahead.
I want to get this in because it does show change in your county and not tied to the apportionment. George Leader, 54, beat Lloyd Wood, 46,000 votes to 27.
Yeah.
And Tom Corbett beat Tom Wolf, 69 to 52. Yeah. So in a 60-year period, what's happened to the party?
I do think that there's been, if you just look at overall, there clearly has been a change in the party's realignment nationally, and it's impacted locally. Look, Harry Truman was from Missouri. I mean, Barack Obama won 2 landslide elections and never came close relatively speaking, to winning the state of Missouri. So you look at Democrats right now are overwhelmingly dominating urban areas, and Republicans are overwhelmingly dominating rural areas, and the suburbs have been where you've seen the real competitive swing on who wins national election. I just think that those impacts, certainly I think are felt locally too. York City is a relatively small sliver of the York County electorate, which I think impacts it. But demographically speaking, our demographics are voting pretty much along the lines of the national demographics.
Who's the next rising star from York County, you think?
I think Kevin Schreiber and Seth Grove have both, from either party, have established themselves as rising stars in the legislature.
And I was just curious, I was just looking at Politics PA, which is sort of a, for PA junk or politics junkies.
Again, didn't get as much viewership as the
Right.
U.S. Women's National Team blog, probably.
They just had a poll of their readers that said that you have a 78% approval rating among political junkies in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious.
My joke was it must have been 22% of like school and charter school officials. Must have, yeah.
So what's next for you? Are you going to run for Senate? The party doesn't seem real happy with Mr. Sestak.
I will absolutely not. Whatever blood test I got to take, sure, I won't be running for the Senate next year. I'll be running for re-election, Auditor General.
Really? I don't have anything else. Do you guys have any questions?
No.
Two questions, audit related. I looked at your website and looked at the mission and your jurisdiction. So I came today with a specific question. How does Pennsylvania sports venues get audited? And I think, Scott, you nibbled at this question, so if it was asked and answered, you can answer differently. When there's taxpayer money that builds and finances sports complexes, how is that audited if your office has jurisdiction to do that?
We would have jurisdiction, and it's through first of all, most of that funding tends to come through what is known as the Redevelopment Assistance Capital Program, which is known as the capital budget. And that tends to be where the York Revolution, the York Sovereign Stadium, the Eagles, Pirates, et cetera, all those stadiums, it tends to be where the funding comes in. And the Auditor General has the authority to audit those venues. Most of those new arenas were built well before I was in, but there were times where the Auditor General did a look at that. And there's also a separate firm that is almost always hired on major projects by the state to oversee the project that is independent from the project. A lot of times it is the York County Economic Development Corporation here gets hired by the state to oversee the project to ensure all state laws are being complied with.
So if the Daily Record wanted to view the performance of the York Revolution Stadium, they'd have access to that?
Yes, absolutely. Now, to say the performance of the stadium, I made it clear when I was running that I thought the lineup of the Pirates at that time was worthy of an audit as well. But clearly what happened was I won, and then they got scared and didn't want the audit, and they've started winning since then, which now opens the door for why I haven't audited the Eagles or the Phillies starting rotation. Yeah, that's right.
Although I wonder what the Eagles are doing.
Yeah, well, that whole quarterback. I mean, look, I don't want to get into the Tebow thing here, but
how is again looking at the website? I didn't see it. Who audits PennDOT and the PDC?
First of all, we audit PennDOT, and we are looking at specifically. There's been concern raised about some overspending on some projects, and so we're keeping that for further information and something that we're going to look at strongly for next year or beyond once the new road funding bill has started to be more mature. What I mean by more mature is we have to have something to audit. So the roads had to actually start getting repaired. The contracting had to go out to see what the effectiveness of a lot of those new programs were to determine. So you can't audit something on day one, but we are eventually going to go in and take a look at that. That would be our jurisdiction. PUC, we have the jurisdiction there, but it would not be on the rates of the utilities or anything like that. It would be specifically, the biggest area would be, for example, the impact fee with the Marcellus Shale and what communities are spending that money on. And that is, again, something we're holding back to see as time goes on if that's worthy of an audit as well. I believe, at least from 40,000 feet, that it probably will be, but again, we want to make sure that program is more mature before we go in and look at it. But that would be the area. We don't have jurisdiction over rates, but where it's specifically something like the impact fee where we would.
Yeah, I got a question for you. Took a little trip down here to St. Louis State Park.
Which state park?
St. Louis. Saw a placard up there about a guy by the name of Dr. Maurice Goddard. He's the Pennsylvania father of the Department of State Parks. And he needed dedicated funding to get it over to he wanted to fund state park for everybody's within 25 miles of the state park. And he found this Oil and Gas Lease Fund Act is what they passed at the time.
Right.
Are we still auditing that particular fund? And does that go directly to all the state parks or DEP or MCR?
We have, the question is, for people out there that maybe didn't hear it, the question is on the oil and gas fund, is that all being dedicated to the state parks?
Mm-hmm.
That law still exists. We have audited it in the past. We found some of the money was being diverted. We will go back in and do a follow-up report at the appropriate time on that. And this is, when the Great Recession hit, a lot of funds were raided to balance the budget. I'm not defending it.
That's what I was wondering.
There's some, some you could argue, the points, but that was one of the funds that was raided. And this is where I think the governor and the legislature have to grapple with a lot of this now, is a lot of those one-time tricks are gone.
And just for a historical point for her, that came under George Leader's tenure in 1955. So it's a long time ago. But still, we've had these oil and gas leases for all these years anyway. But can it be maybe extended to other parts of the Marcellus gas funding issues too?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. The use of the Marcellus shale funding. Have you audited how the counties, is being divvied up to counties, and locally we've used it for things like the rail trail and gazebos and things like that and ball fields. And do you think it's being used appropriately?
I would be more comfortable myself, and I was in the legislature when that came up and I voted against it, if it had more of a direct environmental purpose. That's not to say that some of these projects aren't meritorious. Clearly some of them are, but I'd be more comfortable with about pure water protection.
Well, Barry's question probably comes around because Sam Lewis was a good Republican, and so George Leader helped out.
If you actually, this goes forgetting even the Sam Lewis issue, but it's interesting. Look at the electoral map of Truman in 48, Ford, Carter 76, and then look at the electoral map today. My point is, it used to be both parties were winning states all over the place, like it was like a smorgasbord. And you started to see some, but remember now, Ford was a true Midwestern moderate, as Carter was truly a Southern moderate. And you still, today, it's pretty pronounced. I mean, the divisions are much more pronounced today. And at some point, we're going to have to figure this out, the collective we. And the first time it really looked super pronounced was the 2000 election. I mean, Clinton carried some southern states. It is hard to imagine a Democrat right now winning Arkansas and a Republican winning New York. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's literally, for anyone that pays attention to politics, it's really hard to imagine that happening. In '76, both parties were competitive in both states. Today, and this comes back to the Roger Bannister, I wouldn't be shocked if the Republicans don't even run an ad from New York up through New England in the next election. They may not even run an ad, minus maybe New Hampshire, and I wouldn't bet a lot of money in Vegas that they're going to run an ad in New Hampshire. At the same token, Hillary Clinton may never spend a dime in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, maybe Arkansas she'll do, but Tennessee, South Carolina. And I'm not sure the collective we are, and by the way, this is with them having more money than they've ever had too. I'm not sure the collective we benefit from literally like both political parties writing off 40% of the country.
That's why I want to get rid of the electoral college.
And just-
I think they should be forced to campaign everywhere for the popular vote.
Well, the argument that you would most have for that, and there's a way to go around this while maintaining our state's integrity on the electoral colleges, whoever wins the national popular vote gets your state's electoral votes. And when enough states do that, to get to the 270 or whatever, it could actually trigger in. But when was the last time, and I said, look, no Democrat wins Utah, and I'm a Democrat. Well, when was the last time a candidate, Republican or Democrat, went to Salt Lake to campaign? I think that's wrong. Those voters matter just as much as we do in our battleground state of Pennsylvania. If you actually win the popular vote. Now, again, you may not go to all, there's a pro and con to everything. You would be forced to almost go to the population centers for your rallies, but you would still, if you're a Democrat now, you're probably going to lose the rural areas. But losing 70-30 versus 61-39 is a big difference. It forces you to compete there. Same with the suburbs. And if you're a Republican and you're trying to win the popular vote, you're not going to ignore New York City. You may not win it. No, look, it's almost impossible to think of a national Republican winning New York City. But there's a big difference between getting beat 90-10 and 70-30. And it's because when candidates make their case, they tend to do better. 2 Democratic candidates had a vibrant office in York County in their first election. Bill Clinton in 92 and President Obama in 2008. And both are the only time in the last 50 years that a Democrat cracked 40% in the presidential election in York County. Why? Because they tried.
Very good point.
And this is an overarching question for your office. You presented yourself very well. Anyone watching this session can have faith in government. We could just clone you.
Cloning's illegal, I believe.
And have more individuals.
Make sure clear for the people watching.
So it's obvious you have a good comprehension of how government works and the right thing to do to serve the people. Your office is independent, so you're not a cabinet member. How do you see a line in your function of the office that once you do these audits, and you alluded to this a little bit, once you do these audits, it's like a commission doing a study and then it sits on the shelf and no action's taken. How do you, in the spirit of good government, push the results that you find, where improvement needs to be made, and also good things? So if you find things are working, how do you highlight the things that are working? But do you have a line that you can't cross to put the recommendations in the hands of a legislator where legislation is needed as you see it? How do you view that?
The two things to say to that. One is the best part about my job for me, I can't speak for everyone else that's had it, but for me is I don't, when it comes to the audit results, it doesn't matter my political party. The results are the results. What are the facts and how do we fix it? And so there's no Republican or Democratic audit recommendations. It's not like, well, where's the caucus on this, or I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I'm my own elected office. We're independent. That was designed by the framers of the Pennsylvania Constitution, and I really, really, really enjoy that. And I think that's what most people in the state want. When it comes to how do you go about forcing the change, you can't force it through law, but it's the power of persuasion. To be blunt, it's doing stuff like this. It's press conferences on our audit. It's going to the communities, like when we found that situation in Erie. I went to Erie and 4 of those school board members lost their next election because they wouldn't change. It's stuff like that. So to me, when it comes to the power of my voice, take it for what it's worth when I say power, but there is no line. It's up for me to advocate vigorously for what I think needs to be changed. And I have partnered with members of both parties in the legislature on trying to craft legislation to meet the issues that we have found, and I've partnered with members of both parties, and certainly when it comes to the governor, despite our political difference, I think I had a good relationship with Governor Corbett, and I know I have a good relationship with Governor Wolf now. How I vote in the ballot box is one thing, but I'll work with anyone, and certainly the people that win elections, I'm certainly going to work with them because the voters in that area, that's who they chose, and my job is to work with everybody.
Great. Thank you so much.
No,
for your time.
no,
Last
thank-
chance to do some push-ups for us if you. I'm just kidding.
We'll hold off on that, but I'll post the pictures from the Spartan race on
Please do.
Facebook, and you guys
Definitely,
can.
we'll retweet them for
Yeah,
sure.
you can retweet those all you want. Then, so.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, thanks for having me.
You mentioned one time when we were talking